Over the course of the past 2 years, I have dedicated nearly all my time to making 5 YouTube videos, the Deft vs. Faker series. Prior to that, I had been a full-time YouTuber for over a decade, where across all those years, I had learned there are a few different ways you can succeed on this website. One road you can take is through releasing frequent videos, and as long as you get a moderate viewership on each release, you can support yourself quite well. Alternatively, you could choose to release infrequent videos, but as long as each release gets lots of views, that can also be a pathway to success. But if you're someone who only releases content infrequently while getting no more than moderate viewership, that is how you kill your career. And after sinking 2 years of my life into a single video series, I now realize that might be exactly what I've done. In my time on YouTube, I've made videos almost exclusively about League of Legends, and there's no shortage of great stories to tell in League, but a couple years ago, we got to experience one of the biggest and best stories of all. That was, of course, the 2022 League of Legends World Championship, a tournament that has since gone down as one of the greatest esports events of all time. What made this world so special was that 2 of the greatest players in League of Legends history, who years ago were originally high school classmates and who have since spent the past 10 years constantly battling each other to become the best in the world, well, these players met up in grand finals of League's biggest event and gave fans one of the most incredible best-of-5s we've ever seen. It was the kind of story that had so much drama and so many arcs. It felt fit for an anime or Hollywood. It actually felt scripted. It was a story too perfect to be true. So naturally, a lot of people made documentaries about it almost immediately. Riot commissioned all kinds of promotional material for the event as it was unfolding. Once it ended, teams, media outlets, and independent creators then made all kinds of videos chronicling the story from their own perspectives. But when it came to all these other documentaries, it kind of felt like something was missing. Of all the numerous pieces released on Deft and Faker, every single one of them had one major flaw, in that they only told the story of Worlds itself. They chronicled the 2022 event with all its twists and turns quite well, but that's all they did. That's a problem because, as thrilling as Worlds was, what made it so special was the 10 years of history that built up to it. It was the fact that Deft and Faker had played hundreds of games against each other leading up to this point. The fact they were friends or rivals to some of the greatest players in League history simultaneously. A few of the documentary pieces other people made tried telling parts of that narrative. Some of the history was touched on by nearly everybody. But when it came down to it, nobody had successfully made a documentary that touched on all of the past and accurately portrayed the hundreds of exciting details that made this world so great. That didn't sit right with me. I wanted a documentary that told the entire history, all of the narrative, and if nobody else was going to make it, I figured, why not do it myself? After all, I am a League of Legends YouTuber known for telling stories like these. A documentary on Deft vs. Faker is right up my wheelhouse, and something I should be able to get made in just a couple of months, right? So production began in winter of 2022. The plan? Create one big video on Deft vs. Faker, probably coming in at around 60 to 90 minutes long. I started work immediately with lots of research and writing, combing through every interview and article I could find, all in an attempt to ensure I didn't miss a single narrative. I really wanted this documentary to be truly comprehensive. I had a few other video projects already planned, including another documentary I was in the middle of making, but I figured at the time I should be able to get Deft vs. Faker made relatively fast. I just needed to wrap up these other projects quickly, then lock in, focus on this video, and avoid all other distractions. Unfortunately,
The hope I'd be able to avoid distractions turned out to be nothing but a pipe dream.
That's because the end of 2022 was arguably one of the most busy and hectic periods of my life. I was engaged to the love of my life in the midst of planning our wedding. I had recently moved away from my hometown to a new state in the Sun Belt of America. That move was because my wife had got an amazing new job opportunity, and we were living together, adjusting to soon-to-be married life. But I still owned my childhood home back in Cincinnati, and I needed to figure out exactly what we were doing with that. And on top of all of that, my wife and I were about to take our first ever international trip together to Scotland, where I was about to get the chance to visit the homes and graves of my ancestors. So not exactly the calmest time to take on the biggest YouTube project I'd ever made.
That meant the following spring was mostly spent trying to knock out as many other obligations as possible, starting with other video projects. I recorded and scheduled or released most other vids, including a big Jyn Air documentary, which released to a quiet but very positive response. Seeing some of the encouraging comments on this doc only fueled my desire to make Deft vs. Faker, making me confident that this could be my magnum opus. This might be the best thing I ever make that could propel my career to new heights. I also tried to get some of the other personal obligations taken care of, like any pre-planned leisure events, namely my trip to Scotland, which ended up being a surprisingly exciting and interesting adventure, maybe a story for another time.
But when I returned to America and had to finally sit down to tackle Deft vs. Faker, I had to face some facts. The more I researched this story, the more I realized this was way too big for just one video.
Early on in my production, I had begun storyboarding all the big narrative beats on a corkboard, writing down each event and side story that I needed to include. This was something I did for all my documentaries, but this time around I noticed something interesting. Not only were there a lot of major threads I had to mention, Deft and Faker's history broke up really nicely into 5 distinctive arcs.
Each arc, representing a period of time, had its own story with a beginning, middle, and end that in some ways was self-contained, but also contributed to this larger, expansive narrative. That's when I got the idea, maybe I should turn this into a series. In theory, I could break the documentary up into 5 distinctive episodes, telling each one of the self-contained stories, all building to a big, exciting grand finale. I had experimented with multi-part documentaries in the past, namely splitting my Khan documentary into 2 separate parts, although that was such a small creative change that I don't even know if anyone noticed that documentary was technically a 2-part version. But even if this was new ground, I decided to commit. Deft vs. Faker was no longer just one big video, it would be my first ever documentary series released as 5 episodes. When I made this change, I was really into giving my video projects code names, and I decided to codename this documentary series Project Pillar of Autumn. That's because I hoped this series would be so good it could be the pillar that I built the future of my YouTube channel on, and I hoped I could make all 5 parts over the course of the upcoming summer and then release them during 5 consecutive weeks in the autumn of 2023. There was just one problem that I somehow forgot. I still had a wedding to plan. Yeah, I kind of forgot. There was still a pretty big personal obligation on my plate that was going to take up a lot of time that summer. As it turns out, if you want to have a wedding with booze and dancing and a DJ and all the things people expect at one of those, somebody's got to plan it. Which meant that over the course of that summer, a lot of my and my wife's time was filled with all sorts of planning and decisions that had to be made for the upcoming big day that was also scheduled to take place in the upcoming fall. In other words, I might have planned for Deft vs. Faker to release at the worst possible time.
I did the responsible thing though, and chose to spend much of that summer focused on my soon-to-be wife and our wedding. My wife is the best person I know, and we had a wonderful time celebrating our big day together, even if it did cut into my Deft vs. Faker time quite a bit. During that summer, I only got 2.5 episode scripts written, good progress, but nowhere near enough to get all 5 videos completed by autumn.
So I had to pivot. The Pillar of Autumn would not release in the upcoming autumn. My new goal would be to see if I could get all 5 episodes done by the end of the year. I could still keep my original schedule of releasing all 5 episodes over the course of 5 weeks, and now with an extended timeline, I would have a lot more opportunity to do that. It might be a blessing in disguise. December is the best month for ad revenue on YouTube anyway, and I could still call this the Pillar of Autumn because I'd be completing each episode, making it during that year's autumn. With 3 months clear and no more wedding to plan, I should be able to zero in and finish these 5 episodes, right? Except, I forgot about the house. As mentioned before, even though I had been renting a new place for basically a year at this point, I still had my home in Cincinnati, my childhood home that I grew up in, and I was kind of having a hard time saying goodbye. When my wife first got her job moving us down south, I kind of figured it would be smart to not sell the house immediately, just in case. I mean, maybe her new job wouldn't work out, maybe she wouldn't like it. My wife, of course, encouraged this. She did not want me to sell my childhood home before I was ready to, and she had no idea if she was gonna like this career opportunity or not either. But by now, it had been a year, and she was killing it. I mean, she was one of her company's top performers that year, doing so well that she won us a President's Club trip where we got to take a free vacation on the company's dime. I, meanwhile, was burning through my savings, paying a mortgage on a house I couldn't afford while trying to make this stupid documentary. Now, it really shouldn't be that big of a deal for me to sell this house because there isn't even necessarily that much sentimental value attached to it. My family didn't build the house or anything like that. It wasn't in our family for generations. It was just the house I moved into when I was 3 years old and then spent most of my life growing up and living in. All in all, it's a pretty unremarkable home that I should not have any problems letting go of. But if you couldn't tell by the fact that I have made a career creating documentaries that romanticize the past and put heavy emphasis on sentimentality, all connected to a video game from my childhood that I first started playing in that house, I'm kind of a sucker when it comes to this stuff.
So, that winter of 2023 and 2024 was filled with me trekking up and down I-75. I was driving 468 miles round trip each and every weekend so I could either pack up the remainder of my things or fix up whatever was needed to sell the house. It was frankly pretty exhausting, doubly so because of the emotional toll of saying goodbye to a home I lived 25 years of my life in. I was grateful for the opportunity to take these trips though, as it gave me the chance to record some final videos, document my time there, and have a long emotional goodbye. Honestly, it was one of the defining moments of my life, where I finally grew into a real adult, and I wouldn't mind sharing some of that experience with you, maybe another story for another time.
But soon the house was finally packed up, almost ready to list, and it was time to return to Tennessee and finish Death vs. Faker. At this point, I had completed parts 1 and 2. They were out and seemingly doing well enough. I even managed to release them 2 weeks apart in December of 2023, almost going to plan. But part 3 was nowhere close to being done, and all the trips across the country were just delaying it further. So it seemed that the idea for a series with 5 episodes released 1 week after another was now dead, and my YouTube channel was starting to look pretty barren. It was a far cry of being my Pillar of Autumn, but at this point I just hoped I could release these videos fast enough they could still find success. And most of my life shouldn't be that busy now that we're entering 2024, right? Well, it turned out I was wrong. Life was going to be crazy throughout this video series, no matter what I did. Even so, I was still convinced this documentary was going to be the best thing I made. I had to see it through. So going into 2024, we have a new goal. I only have 2 parts left to make, episodes 4 and 5. Let's see if we could get the last 2 parts finished before my upcoming honeymoon, which would be taking place in the upcoming April, because my wife had allowed me to delay our honeymoon to try to finish this stupid series. That should be plenty of time to allow me to finish just the final 2 episodes But it turned out neither episode 4 or 5 would get anywhere close to being done by April. That's because the new year was filled with me finally packing up the last of my things as I finished my move to Tennessee and crossed the threshold into adulthood, listing the Cincinnati house to sell. I also turned 30 years old and went through an existential crisis that I now have one foot in the grave. We also took that big President's Club trip my wife won from her work, as well as our honeymoon, which ended up being a little stressful because they were almost back to back. We also went to see the once-in-a-lifetime solar eclipse occurring just outside my childhood home that took place the exact same day we said goodbye for the final time, closing on a sale. The eclipse ended up being a tearful out-of-body experience shared with friends and family, where shortly after that, my wife's family also happened to sell their childhood home a week later. That meant we had to take 2 massive trips, driving U-Hauls across the country to move all our stuff into a rented place. Then, as it turned out, we had the opportunity to purchase our first home together nearby one of the coolest cities in America, because this was the city that almost destroyed the world by building the atomic bomb. Another story for another time. And through all of this, I'm just furious. I want to finish Deft vs. Faker. This is going to be the best thing I make after all. By the time summer is here, I finish episode 4, but I only release it 8 months after episode 3 came out. As such, episode 4 gets the worst viewership of any episode of the series, sending me into a panic that everyone just forgot I was making this. And I don't want to let that happen. I refuse to let that happen. So I go full steam ahead into making episode 5, which I am going to finish no matter what. That fall, I am unpacking our things in our new house that we just bought. I'm taking care of my wife when she seems to get the flu. But through all of it, I am making Deft vs. Faker. I'm going on every errand. I'm being an adult still. I'm making time to exercise and walk the dog, cook meals, and stay healthy. But I am always making time to work on Deft vs. Faker. This is the one story that deserves undivided attention. This is the one story League of Legends has to offer the world greater than any other. Things keep popping up in my life somehow, because maybe that's just what adulthood is, but I will not let it derail my work anymore. I will finish making this video or die trying. This is the one thing I can create that will be better than anything I've ever made after all. I become possessed. There is nothing I want to